And I guess if you don't want to come sit in the middle, I'm going to get started anyways. All right. So I'd like to welcome you to Stettler. It's great to see everybody here this evening on such a warm, sunny day. I'd like to welcome you to an evening of solutions for a new Alberta, brought to you by the Alberta Prosperity Project, a group of grassroots Albertans with no politicians at our table, committed to advocating, inspiring, and educating all Albertans on the merits of a free and prosperous, independent nation of Alberta. The Alberta Prosperity Project came from humble beginnings just over a year ago in an oilfield shop in Nisku, Alberta. A group of Albertans had had enough of the ineffectiveness of our provincial government, and they had had enough of the overreach from Ottawa. So in that meeting, that was often a heated debate, the Alberta Prosperity Project was born, and here we are. I would like to introduce you to Alain Gauthier, who will open our event with a prayer.
Well, welcome everybody. One of the critical pieces of everything that we do at the APP is that always recognizing the supremacy of God. So everything we think about, the laws, the rules, how we behave among ourselves, we always treat each other with respect. We always want to have an open mind, but always understanding that the ultimate power is not in our hands. So I'd like to pray for us, I'd like to pray for our province, and I'd like to pray for our country. If you could please join me. Almighty God, we are so humbling ourselves in front of you now to ask for your mercy on this country, mercy on this province, and for the continued blessing on this province and this country. And on this gathering tonight, that we remain very respectful to each other, but also open-minded, so we can hear the teachings you may have in mind for us. In your name we pray, amen.
So my name is Shannon Packham. Some of you may have heard me speak before. I'm from Patricia, Alberta, and I used to be a teacher. I'm currently in a little battle right now because I'm not attached to a school, so therefore I don't have any teaching credentials. I'm working on that. Anyways, I refused to take part of the abuses that I knew were coming into the classrooms, and so therefore I haven't been inside one since February of 2020. And at that point, I came to realize that if you are not willing to stand for what is right, then you're also a part of what is wrong. So we all need to dig really deep and deal with what is wrong. And I often start our events with a famous quote. So here's a new one for you. Alberta's very own Chris Scott often says, sometimes to do the right thing, one has to stand up and be alone. But when you do the right thing, you're only alone for a moment. He also says, alone, you can only do so little, but together we can do so much more. The Alberta Prosperity Project has been traveling across Alberta, bringing back community and growing the sense of unity. And it is true, together we can do so much more. Our presentations will plant the seeds of hope, they'll plant the seeds of change, and we hope that they will even plant the seeds of courage. The other side of fear is courage, and the other side of hope is change. We trust that these presentations will encourage you to join us and take our messages of hope, change, and courage back to your communities, for your friends, and for your neighbors. So if you've been to an Alberta Prosperity Project before, you know how we do things. We have presentations, and then we have some time set aside for questions and answers. We ask that if you have a question, you write it on one of those index cards, little recipe card, and in your best ever handwriting. That would be great. Then I read the questions, and the fellows that are doing the presentations will answer those. There's refreshments over in the corner. There's food in the other room over there. The exits are marked with an exit sign, and the washrooms are over on this side. We do have donations at the door. We have memberships at the door, and we have merchandise also at the door. And after our presentations are over, we have a special treat. Country Western music by Alberta's own Lindsay Butler, a 7th generation Alberta born and raised in our foothills. I heard her play in Calgary for the first time on Monday, and I can guarantee that you're going to love it. I'd like to thank our volunteers from the Stettler chapter and the surrounding chapters. And thank you, Chris, for the food. It was delicious. Let's have a hand for the food, please. And the only volunteer that I actually know by name from Stettler is Sally, but I see Kurt Bloomquist is right over there. And we have regional leaders from other areas as well. Shauna Krubish is your regional leader here in the Stettler area, and she is right there. Okay, so let's get started. Our first guest is a resident of Edmonton, educated for over 17 years at the universities of Alberta, McGill, and Stanford. And I got to point out that it wasn't 17 years in a row, 17 years total over a period of time. He is a recently retired 30-year heart and lung surgeon and a critical care specialist. He is known as the North American pioneer of heart and lung transplants, implementing the first heart and lung transplantation program in Western Canada, performing the first heart transplant in 1985 and the first combined transplant of heart and both lungs in 1986. The successes of his programs grew to be the largest and most successful in Canada and one of the largest programs in North America. He's been recognized for numerous awards in excellence in medicine as well as in community service. He is a key driver of this project as our CEO, and on top of all of that, he is an individual who has had tremendous political influence in the eras of Premiers Getty, Klein, and Stelmach. Here to talk to us today about Alberta's prosperity and freedom through independence, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Dennis Modry. This one is a little bit wobbly. Yeah.
Thanks, Shannon. So, Shannon, just one correction. Those 17 years were in a row. Yeah, so there you go. Yeah, I was married at the time, too. I eloped when I was 18, and it reminds me of a comment. Anybody know Jimmy Pattison? If you read his book entitled Jimmy, there's a statement in there that I think applies to me. Occasionally wrong, but never in doubt. And that's why I eloped when I was 18. Any case, so that is a true story. Well, thank you so much for coming out today. How many people here have been to a previous APP event? So many of you. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And how many people here, looking at what's happening around the world and by our federal government and what's going on in the Netherlands, feel as though something needs to be done? Right. So the question is what is it to be for us? Because there's no question in my mind, as I look around and see what's happening, we're facing an existential threat to our very way of life, to our individual freedoms and rights, and our prosperity if we do nothing. And that brings up one of the three possibilities: the do nothing possibility, and two other, you might call them independence possibilities. I heard of a fourth, though, tonight that I've been thinking about for quite some time. I'll touch on that a little later. But let's examine where we are right now. How many people feel that we're overgoverned, overregulated, and overtaxed? And how many people would like freedom from wokeness, cancel culture, and critical race theory? And how about freedom from the Great Reset? Right. So this I think is worth spending a few minutes talking about, because this is one of the things that really angers me. As someone who spent a career as a cardiac surgeon trying to help people live longer and a better quality of life, it bothers me right now what we're seeing on a global scale, which I can refer to as nothing more or less than man's inhumanity to man. And that really is a reflection of the Great Reset, which of course is a highly influential movement by the global elites of the United Nations and the World Economic Forum under a contract that they've signed called Agenda 2030 to reset the global economy using banks. And you've seen how banks can be used to suppress people's ability to access their accounts, using banks, governance agencies, and environmental, social, and governance metrics to control billions of people. So what we're seeing take place now is the onset of the Great Reset. So now we know it's coming. There's going to be a mandated 30% fertilizer reduction coming. So when you think about these things, it should make you angry. And is this the kind of dystopian future you want, to be totally controlled in everything that you do? Even more egregious, that really gets to my heartstrings, is a statement by a presenter at the World Economic Forum where he said, "We need to eliminate billions of people. They will find peace in the grave." Well, that really incenses me. That makes me so angry. And it should make you angry as well. And it should make you want to stand up and do something about it to prevent this from occurring. And this is really what the Alberta Prosperity Project is about. It's designed to protect your interests, your individual freedoms and rights, your prosperity, and your self-determination. That's what it's about. So what are our options now to prevent the Great Reset from occurring? What are our options so that we can absolutely, unequivocally protect our individual freedoms, rights, prosperity, and self-determination? Well, there are two main ones, and then there's another one. How many people here would like Alberta to remain in Confederation but with a better deal? Anybody? Because I think it's important to understand that at this particular point in time, it's very likely that the majority of Albertans want a better deal within Confederation. How many people would like Alberta to leave Canada and become an independent, sovereign, constitutional republic? And how many people would like Alberta to become the 51st state? Okay, there's a few of you as well. Okay, well, let's examine, first of all, because I think it's the most plausible of the two main options, fixing Alberta's circumstances in Confederation or Alberta becoming a new sovereign constitutional republic. I'm going to start off by asking you to think about ending equalization, because we did have a referendum on ending equalization. So consider that as a metaphor for if we end equalization, we end all programs that adversely affect Alberta and we take control of everything else. Think about it from that perspective. Now, we'll just touch on briefly the answer to this issue, ending equalization, through the lens of history, the electoral imbalance, and the constitutional hurdles. So very quickly, the fix was in 1904. Now, the province became, along with Saskatchewan, incorporated into Canada September 1, 1905. But in 1904, Clifford Sifton, the Minister of the Interior of the Liberal government of Sir Wilfrid Laurier, made a very prescient statement. And some of you have heard me say this before, but it's worth repeating because then you understand why we are where we are now. But what he said was this: we desire, and all Canadian patriots desire, and Canadian patriots, by the way, at that time were the people living in the regions of Quebec and Ontario. So we desire, and all Canadian patriots desire, that the great trade of the prairies, and trade of the prairies is Alberta's wealth, along with Saskatchewan's wealth, that the great trade of the prairies shall go to enrich our people in the East, to build up our factories and our places of work, and in every legitimate way contribute to our prosperity. So in other words, we started off as a colony to serve the interests of the East, and 116 years later, we continue to be pillaged and plundered of our wealth for the benefit of the East. And over this 116 years, not one federal government or provincial government has ever protected our interests. And I'm going to touch on just one thing to slam this home. And that was, in the 70s, Alberta was booming. It was becoming the economic center of Canada. And there was massive demographic shifts of people and businesses coming to Alberta. But that collided with the Quebec secession movement. And so how did the federal government respond? Pierre Elliott Trudeau, Marc Lalonde, the finance minister, and the elite, financial elites of Bay Street, Ottawa, and Montreal, they came up with, many of you know, the National Energy Policy, designed ostensibly to shift wealth from Alberta to other regions of the country so that they would have similar social programs. That is not true. The two main reasons for the National Energy Policy was to prevent Alberta from ever again becoming a threat to be the center of economic power in Canada and to buy Quebec's loyalty to Canada with Alberta's wealth. That was the purpose of the National Energy Policy. And don't let anybody tell you anything different, because it explains why this oppression of Alberta is occurring to prevent us from rising. Now, let's move on from history. There's a lot more that could be said. But if you think it's possible to fix Alberta's circumstances in Confederation and you understand that little bit of history, let's move on to the electoral imbalance. Now, as you know, we do not have representation by population. Prince Edward Island gets to elect one MP for every 40,000 population. Alberta, one MP for every 130,000 population in the House of Commons. And it's no better in the Senate. Alberta and BC have 25% of the population, 11% of the Senate seats. What does that mean? It means two things. Number one, every federal election will be decided by voter-rich Quebec and Ontario. And it doesn't matter the party in power or the party that wants to become the government, they will always pander to the wishes of Ontario and Quebec ahead of the West, and in particular ahead of Alberta. So the fix was in the way Confederation was structured. Now, if you still think it's possible to fix Alberta's circumstances in Confederation, let's look at the 5 constitutional hurdles, of which there are. Starts with the House of Commons. In order to change the Constitution, you need to have a majority vote in the House of Commons. That also has to occur in the Senate, a majority vote in the Senate, to open and change the Constitution to benefit Alberta. And of course, even to get there, you need 7 of 10 provincial legislatures. So in other words, think of 7 provinces and 50% of representing 50% of the population in those 7 provinces also have to vote in favor of opening the Constitution and changing it to benefit Alberta. And how do you think Quebec would vote, since they get 2 of every $3 of equalization? Pretty unlikely. And then, of course, Quebec is the 4th hurdle in and of itself. Why? Well, because it believes that it has a veto, even though it never signed the 1982 Constitution Act. And they demonstrated recently that they actually do have a veto. A few weeks ago, their legislature, the Quebec legislature, passed into law Bill 96, which abridges minority language rights in Quebec, overriding the Constitution. The federal government won't challenge that. The courts might, but the way Quebec gets everything it wants, it's very unlikely that anything will happen. And then the 5th hurdle is the Supreme Court itself. So if there's a constitutional battle that's going to be adjudicated, it will be adjudicated at the level of the Supreme Court. And when you understand the way the Supreme Court is constituted, with 9 justices, all appointed from the Prime Minister's office, 3 come from Quebec, 3 from Ontario, 1 from the Maritimes, and 2 from all of Western Canada, how do you think a constitutional battle will be adjudicated? In Alberta's favor or in favor of Quebec and Ontario? And if you want a little bit of proof, just look at what the Supreme Court did not too long ago, approving a carbon tax. Now, there have been 2 previous attempts to change the Constitution. One was the Charlottetown Accord and the other was the Meech Lake Accord. And neither of them were successful. So what I'm saying, ladies and gentlemen, it's virtually impossible to fix Alberta's circumstances within Confederation. It's just not possible. Alberta has 0 leverage to do that right now. So is it possible then for Alberta to become an independent sovereign nation? Well, right now it's impossible, but you could make it possible. So let's pose the question to all of you. Would you like the next provincial government to be in a position of strength to negotiate on your behalf to protect your individual freedoms, rights, prosperity, and self-determination? Would you like that? All right, great. And if you would like that, would you be willing to give the next provincial government a mandate in order to protect those individual freedoms, rights, prosperity, and self-determination? Would you give the government a mandate to do that? Because the only thing that would give the next provincial government a mandate to protect us and to protect this amazing province is a successful referendum on independence, because that gives us the moral and legal legitimacy to chart a new path forward. And so this is the way it would work. In May 2023, less than a year from now, an independence-focused government is elected. I'll tell you how we can make that happen. And in the first 2 years, this is just one model, it takes control of the 5 things that it can within the Constitution without creating, it's perfectly legal to take control of policing, pensions, immigration, employment insurance, and provincial tax collection. Taking control of provincial tax collection sets the stage for taking control of federal tax collection. At the same time that the government is doing those things, it's also trying to negotiate with the federal government to take control of federal taxation. Because he who has the gold rules, right? Take control of federal taxation. Why is that important? Because we give $60 billion a year to Ottawa and we get back about $27 billion. Think about what we could do with the rest of that. So we're negotiating to take control of federal taxation. We're negotiating to get out from under the regulations that are inhibiting the development and transport of our natural resources. We're negotiating to get rid of a carbon tax. We're negotiating as well to get out from under the inhibitions of the Canada Health Act to bring about more creative solutions to healthcare. How many people here have waited an inordinate length of time to access healthcare? Has anybody here waited a long time to get into the system? Right, there's a number of people. When I was in active practice, there were always people dying on the waiting list. People wait sometimes for 6 months, a year, 2 years to get a hip fixed, their knee fixed, or various other things, neurologic studies, et cetera, et cetera. Our healthcare system functions in the lowest quartile of quality and the highest quartile of cost. Something's wrong. We know how to fix it. So what I'm getting at here is in the first 2 years of the next government's mandate, you take control of the 5 things that you can take control of. You negotiate to get control of the other things. You're demonstrating to the public the intransigence of Ottawa to deal fairly with Alberta. And the Alberta Prosperity Project, meanwhile, is out there educating people about the rationale and merits of independence. And so it's a twin approach, a two-pronged approach. You have an independence-focused government that's educating the public, and then you have an educational society doing the same thing, because we are an educational society. The Alberta Prosperity Society is a registered society with a board of governors of 10 people that governs the Alberta Prosperity Project. So here we are now 18 to 24 months after the 2023 election. You have a referendum on independence. It could occur earlier than that because we have a petition that you should all sign, a petition to force the government to hold a referendum. That's another approach to get a referendum on the table, but we need about 350,000 signatures, so please sign it. So you have this referendum on independence, and when successful, Alberta now, for the first time in 116 years, has serious negotiating power. And that power permits Alberta to negotiate its departure from Canada. Now, nobody knows really how those negotiations would go, but you can imagine that there would be negotiations on parks, on military bases, for example, the debt. And speaking of the debt, the federal government has about a $1.5 trillion debt that we did not incur. And we've already given nearly $700 billion to Ottawa since 1965, for which we've not got back 1 penny. So in my opinion, we've already taken more of the debt than anybody else, and we shouldn't take any more on these negotiations. But we're not at a point of having those negotiations yet, are we? So you negotiate for 6 to 12 months, and we're now at 2025. And in that time period, ultimately we get to the point where we declare our independence. But with that successful referendum on independence as well, some of the other things that we can do while the negotiations are going on. The provincial government can inform the public and corporations that all tax remittance, federal, personal, corporate, must now go to the Alberta Treasury. So now we've got control of federal taxation because we have a mandate from you to do just that. So where does the Alberta Prosperity Project fit into this now? How do we make that happen? Well, it's really based on numbers. And here's what I mean. It's the 3.5% rule, for those of you who haven't heard of it, coined by a Harvard professor by the name of Erica Chenoweth, who studied societal movements over a few hundred years. And what she determined was that 3.5% of a population can change the direction of that society. This is what's happened with the socialists, Marxists out there. It's a small number, but they have moved society in a direction we do not want to go. So we need to do the same thing, but in greater numbers. When Jason Kenney was elected with the UCP, they had 120,000 members, which is 3.5% of the voting public. So when the Alberta Prosperity Project grows its membership to 500,000, 1 million or more, we will control the outcome of the next election. As Ralph Klein used to say, he used to muse with this statement. He said, find a parade and get in front of it. Well, we're creating that parade, we're creating that movement. And with 500,000, 1 million or 1.5 million people, we absolutely will control the outcome of the 2023 election. Why do I know that? Well, it's very simple, because we have the various independence parties coming to us. We have the UCP leadership candidates coming to us because they understand what we're doing. But we can hold them accountable in order to have the support of our 500,000, 1 million, 1.5 million members. So it's always been up to you, but there's never been an organization to galvanize everybody in this fashion. And we have the best salespeople in the world to drive Alberta independence, and his name is Justin Trudeau. The organization's name is the WEF, United Nations. They are the best salespeople for Alberta to get out of Dodge. It's really that simple. So they're helping us out a lot. And I can tell you, they're going to be providing a whole bunch more incentive coming along, because you just know it's coming. So what I'd like you to consider in what we are doing to grow this membership, we've also now signed the contract with Rebel News. Western Standard's coming up in a week or so. We're rolling out all kinds of content with them, along with paid social media, Touch Broadcasting Canada, Shine FM, 5 FM channels, and paid social media. So there's a lot we're doing, and there's a lot more that I can say, but I don't want to monopolize the whole time here. I'd like you to consider, though, if you're not already a member, please become a member. If you have the time, you can perhaps consider volunteering or participate in a chapter development. And I'm just simply going to close by saying this, folks. We're really very fortunate in this province to have so many like-minded people, and that's why we can do this in this province. And you might be interested to know, for those of you who don't, that we met with 11 people from Saskatchewan on Monday in Calgary, who are also very interested in starting a prosperity project there as well. So we're obviously getting a lot of traction. There are going to be people that are going to question certain things, and that's fine, because we will do our very best to answer those questions. But I want you to think about this as well. But for what we are doing, what else is there? One gentleman came up to me earlier today and said, you know, the US would probably pay $2 trillion to buy Alberta, but that would that would certainly give a lot of money in everybody's jeans and finance healthcare, education, etc. for millennia to come probably. But is this what Albertans want right now? I think it's enough of a stretch to go from where we are to become an independent nation with international support, which I'm very confident we will garner, because everything we're doing is completely legal, and it's the simplest and most straightforward pathway out of Dodge. Thank you very much for your attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Dennis Modry. Remember, if you have any questions, just ask for one of these cards, write your question down, and we'll get it answered for you, or we'll try. Our next presenter is from Lloydminster, Alberta. He's a brilliant industrial organization economist and a published author. He is a speaker and commentator on political and ethical issues and has studied under some of Canada's foremost economists. He also hosts or co-hosts a podcast that the Alberta Prosperity Project has on Thursdays, and today was their 10th podcast. I recommend you check that out. With his keen interest, wit, and bright mind, he offers so much perspective to the Alberta Prosperity Project, and he is here to demonstrate the many merits and benefits of a free and prosperous Alberta. He cares deeply about the state that Alberta finds herself in and about how intrusively our governments meddle in our economy in order to facilitate our ruin. He is our acting VP of Economics and also a co-leader of our youth chapter. Here with an economic forecast for an independent nation of Alberta, Mr. Tanner Naday.
After the network shutdowns this past weekend, with debit cards rendered useless and cash once again proven not only useful but necessary, is there anyone here who wants Canada and Alberta to adopt a central digital currency as its own? That's the end of the speech. No. A central bank digital currency is coming to Canada, and if we do nothing, Alberta. Searching for more control, lusting for more regulation, invading our private lives. The government is investigating the merits and the benefits of a digital currency that will, if we are apathetic, if we do nothing, evolve into one global digital currency, I am certain. But I know you will agree with me when I declare there is absolutely no way, not while breath is in our bodies and blood flows through our veins, that we will, for one moment, stand idle and watch a federal digital currency conquer the country. We are not idle, we are industrious, and so we are building up a movement. We are composing a concerto. We are creating a wave of support so loud all politicians will have no choice but to recognize the unified thunder of a people in Alberta declaring that we are not going to adopt a digital currency as our own. But why are we opposed to a digital currency? Imagine a scenario that is not at all implausible and not at all inconceivable. Here you are. Here I am, with powerful bureaucrats labeling us men and women with unacceptable views. Now, these views, of course, are not unacceptable, but because the world is flipped upside down, the most ordinary man in the world is the world's most radical man. And we are not alone. There are countless millions with the same thoughts and views, and they are the ones who supported the convoy. They are the ones who champion the foundation of the family. They are the ones who want to be left alone. They are the ones who want to be free. And they are the ones that government catalogs as threats to their empire of power. So here we are with beliefs that are not the bureaucrats' own. Your views and my views are labeled unacceptable by men and women who themselves are unacceptable. But you understand that if we are forced to endure a centralized digital currency, those beliefs that we have, and we who hold those beliefs, can be punished for them. And you can be punished by, well, locking us out of the electrical grid, for example, or locking us out of these centralized digital bank accounts, thereby rendering our ability to provide for our families moot. Go to pay for an oil change and you can't. Pull up to fill up your car and your card is declined. Step into a restaurant and step out because you're deemed socially unworthy to dine. Turn off the lights, turn off the heat, cut off the power because you refuse to act the way that Cabinet wants you to act, and you refuse to think the things that Parliament demands that you think. This is punishment by economics, but it will not be called punishment. Cutting off our accounts will not be called punishment. It will be called education. It will be called economic quarantine. It will be called the abolition of hate speech. It will be called a necessary step in the process of creating a state of pure progressivism and modernity. Now, the government will say I am misrepresenting them. They will say I am being disingenuous by using terms like punishment, inflicting, and tyranny when talking about the abolition of cash and the introduction of this digitalized currency. I am not. We are not deceived by a name. To have our accounts frozen, to be exiled from the electrical grid, to lose our liberty, to undergo mental assaults in choosing whether to provide for a family or disobey the wishes and the demands of government for which central bankers know how to deliver, to be molded and remade into some image of a Laurentian idol, and to know this process will never end until each one of us declares our absolute obedience and allegiance to a state we do not serve. Who cares whether we call this centralized digital currency modern or innovative or humane or not? And if that doesn't conquer us, we will be conquered by inflation that will inevitably rise as a consequence of a few central bankers controlling this massive digitalized currency. Unnatural expansion of the monetary supply encourages monetary booms, and that's what we saw during COVID. Government took cash, a lot of cash, they printed a lot of cash, and they injected it into the economy. And the moment that happened, you can look at the data, you will see the stock market go like this, even though all businesses are closed. Excuse me, before an election, after an election, during an election, the government, right, in a bid to prop up their ratings, rushes to central banks and they demand print more, print money, print money, print more, to be scattered out to the population below. But there is a present problem. Government, at least in their eyes, has recognized an inefficiency in the process of currency creation, the commercial banks. In order to get this magic money to Canadians, to we as Canadians, it goes through commercial bankers. What I mean is, when banks loan out money, as you know, they engage in something called fractional reserve banking. And to put it quite simply, it simply multiplies, quote unquote, the amount of currency or money that is flowing through the economy, and prices rise as a consequence of this. Now, granted, government maneuvered over the last 2 years, they maneuvered around this simply by depositing cash into accounts. They did that, it's true. But why not bypass commercial banks altogether? Think of the ease, think of the ability of a purely digital system where a few politicians could create or destroy money in an instant. It wouldn't be a difficult process. It would hardly be a process at all. The consequences, of course, as you already know, with the inflation that we are suffering today, will be devastating. But we haven't driven all this way to bring you an economic message of despair and doom and destruction. We have traveled here instead to present for you a solution for which is Alberta's independence. The Canadian dollar is weak, it's inflated, it's fiat, and it's controlled by a central few, which means that the central few control you. We do not want that any longer. We do not want to see our savings disappear because of inflation any longer. Instead, we want independence and will emancipate ourselves from the Canadian dollar and transition to a new, strong, competitive, stable, hard, real dollar or dollars, not controlled by bureaucrats, not controlled by central bankers, but instead controlled by you and the market in the province of Alberta. This is also not the time to be nuanced. We cannot be careless with our words. Right? When independent, Alberta would absolutely, unilaterally, publicly declare a total and final divorce from any concept or implementation of this centralized digital currency, thereby ensuring that no politician could ever banish us or our children or our grandchildren from our bank accounts, from our earnings, and from our wealth, and therefore from our ability to provide. Which leads me to my third point. It needs to be written, encoded in the Constitution, a new Constitution, bound and permanent, that a politician in an independent Alberta has absolutely no right or legal shelter to invade private bank accounts and freeze assets and savings and earnings of law-abiding citizens like yourselves who have done absolutely nothing wrong. That has to be totally illegal. All of us are here today because we are resisting the tyranny before the tyranny truly exists. We are doing this, all of this, right now, so that we do not wake up one day and realize that it's too late. And if we do nothing, if we are drunk with comfort and watch this centralized digital currency set itself up as the right-handed servant of an omnicompetent technocracy, then we shall have, or there shall be, financial security. Of course, it will be the security that everyone's wealth and savings are insecure. There will be financial protection, only it will be protection for the government, a guarantee that no one can spend or save behind their backs, and not protection for us, or certainly not for our freedoms. But I am convinced this province is ripe to do something great. I am astonished and encouraged by the movement that is already rising. We are working as hard as we can, and we need the help of every single one of you so that we can today and tomorrow and for the future ensure that Alberta is a prosperous nation, a nation that's known for its abundance of rights and freedoms, and a nation that all will look upon and see sound monetary policy, flourishing families of freedom, and a government that is, as it should be, nothing more than a servant of the people, the Constitution, and the supremacy of God. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Tanner Naday. Okay, our next guest, and then we'll have a quick break, I promise. Our next guest is from Calgary. He's been practicing law for more than 30 years. He has effectively advocated for the rights and interests of First Nations in Canada at all levels of court in those 20 years, and has been involved in winning cases for the First Nations at every level of court in Canada for that long as well. He acted as lead counsel in the Mikisew Cree Nation case at the Supreme Court of Canada, in which the court issued a unanimous 9-0 ruling in favor of Mikisew in what has become a landmark decision of that court. You might also recognize his name as one of the litigators who had Dr. Hinshaw on the hot seat over the last little while. He is a no-nonsense, let's get results kind of guy, and we are happy to have him on our board of directors as the VP General Counsel. Ladies and gentlemen, here to shed some light on independence, the legal system, and so much more, Mr. Jeff Rath.
Thank you very much. I'd like to say what a pleasure it is to be here today, to be able to talk to you about an issue that has become so important to all of us, namely getting our province, our country of Alberta, out from underneath the boot of Justin Trudeau and the people in his government in Ottawa. As many of you may be aware this week, the Trudeau government and their Minister of Climate Idiocity, Minister Gibault, have decided to arbitrarily pass legislation reducing the amount of fertilizer that farmers are allowed to use on their crops. So as a matter of federal mandate, the government of Canada is going to arbitrarily and unilaterally legislate a 30% reduction in the use of nitrogen fertilizer across the prairies. So think about that for a second. We have a government in Ottawa that thinks it's appropriate to simply arbitrarily decide what crop yield should be in Western Canada. They haven't consulted with farmers in Western Canada. I have yet to see a study as to what the economic impact of reducing crop yields by 30% will do to the family farm or the ability of farmers to continue to make a profit, support their loans, support their farming operations on a going forward basis. And at the end of the day, you have to wonder if this isn't part of the overall scheme to continually bankrupt and destroy the businesses and livelihoods of people of this province so that large corporate interests can then come in and buy up people's lands and property at a gross undervalue. This is what we're living with today. On top of that, and I mean, if that isn't ridiculous enough, we have a Senate who's in the midst of passing two Senate bills, one called S201, which is a companion bill to Senate Bill S233, which are bills that propose bringing in what's called a universal basic income. What this means, the legislation means, and I mean, I couldn't believe it myself when I read it for the first time, the level of economic stupidity behind this is so astounding, is that 17-year-old children can drop out of high school, have no plans to continue their education, have no plans to work, have no plans to train, have no plans to get a job, no plans to have a job, and can sit at home and collect $2,000 a month from the Canadian government for life in the form of this so-called universal basic income. So the companion, that's Bill S233. The companion bill to this legislation is a bill called S201. S201 is a bill that proposes lowering the voting age in Canada to 16. So I hate to tell you, and I mean, I've talked to a number of people about this, what my 16-year-old self might have done if I was told, hey, all you have to do is vote for a bozo liberal in Ottawa, and when you turn 17, you can drop out of high school, and somebody's going to magically give you $2,000 a month to buy beer and muscle car parts, right? But that is literally what the government of Canada is proposing doing to the economy of Alberta. And think about that on a rolling forward basis, as every crop of 17-year-olds removes themselves from the workforce, stops being educated, stops caring about having to work because they can sit at home and collect $2,000 a month for nothing. It's going to completely destroy the labor force in Western Canada. No thought to that, what the long-term implications of it are. This is, in essence, the foundation of this so-called Great Reset that Dr. Modry was talking about. So, when we talk about all of this in the context of Agenda 2030 and the urgency of all of this and the urgency of getting organized and the urgency of talking to your friends and your family and your neighbors about getting involved and coming out and supporting events like this. And again, I want to thank everybody from the bottom of my heart for everybody being here today. You understand the importance of this. These are not theoretical issues that we're dealing with. I mean, so much of this stuff is so stupid. Some days you can't even believe it's what's actually going on. I mean, the fertilizer example was one issue. I mean, one of the ones that, made me laugh the most was Trudeau's recent announcement that he was going to outlaw all handguns in Canada. All he ended up doing was emptying the shelves of every gun store in Alberta of every single handgun in the province. And, I think a special award, needs to go out to Justin Trudeau as the Alberta handgun salesman of the millennia, because I don't think anybody has ever done more for the dispersion of firearms into provincial homes and the provincial economy than Justin Trudeau did last month. But again, this is what we're dealing with. We're constantly being forced to live with the fact that as Albertans, we are being governed by the stupid. All right. A perfect example of that, and I've spoken about this before, is a month or so ago, I was watching CPAC in the wake of all the Emergency Act nonsense that went on in Ottawa over the bouncy castle protests. And there's this Liberal MP proudly talking about how in developing, and he was taking credit for developing this green energy plan for Western Canada, which incidentally will include the bankruptcy of farmers by arbitrarily cutting back the amount of fertilizer they can use. But he proudly announced that, in studying the green energy plan for Western Canada, we came to the understanding that there's nothing you can't do with a barrel of canola oil that you can do with a barrel of petroleum. Leaving aside the fact that that's completely untrue, I previously used a word that sounds a lot like bullshit with regard to that. And specifically what I'm talking about, obviously we know about petrochemicals and how petrochemicals are made. You're not going to be running canola oil through the plant at Joffrey and get plastics out the other end. So leaving aside the fact that there's lots of things you can't do with canola oil that you can do with petroleum, right? Just for fun, on that day, I Googled the spot price of a barrel of canola oil. For your interest, it was $1,018, right? So we have these people in Ottawa that literally think they are so smart and are patting themselves on the back and, oh my God, aren't we wonderful people? We're going to run combines and trucks and tractors on canola oil at $1,018 a barrel, right? So if you didn't think that the family farm was going to be bankrupted, by arbitrary and ever increasing reductions in the amount of fertilizer that you're allowed to use on your crops, think about the day that you're told that you're going to have to spend, $50 a liter for diesel fuel because they're insisting that no oil can be produced or used on the farm other than oil produced from canola oil. I mean, these people are so ridiculous in their thinking. They just constantly engage in this magical thinking that they think they can wave magic fairy wands in the air and their economic dreams of carbon reduction are going to come to life without killing people, right? This is what we're dealing with. So quite often, Dr. Modry, when he's speaking, will talk about the urgency of where we're at and uses the analogy of all of us being in a canoe together, paddling down the Niagara River, and all of us realizing, we better get our act together because the falls are approaching. And if we don't all paddle for shore as hard as we can, immediately, we are all going to die. That's how serious this is in terms of, the intentions of Ottawa for this province and why I personally believe, stop trying to get along with Canada, stop talking about half measures. We need independence now, and it's urgent. Now, to do that from a legal perspective, it's not as daunting as one would think. I think it's easier to achieve independence for Alberta than it is to amend the Canadian Constitution. At its core, it requires 50% plus one of us, a majority of the voters in this province, coming together and voting for independence. I start from the proposition with regard to independence that, first of all, Alberta is not separating from Canada. When we watched that disgusting display in the House of Commons in and around the freedom protests in Ottawa with the bouncy castles and the hot tubs and the clearly peaceful protests that resulted in Justin Trudeau showing his true authoritarian colors and having Indigenous elders trampled by horses because he couldn't stand being made fun of. In the context of that, we were called every name of the book. homophobes, racists, extremists, you name it, every dirty name in the book that people in Ottawa could call us while looking down their noses at us from within the taxpayer-supported bubble of Ottawa that we all pay for with our taxes. We don't need to separate from Canada. Justin Trudeau has separated Canada from us. And they do it every day with their ongoing stupidity, like the recent announcement of devastating prairie farms with an arbitrary 30% reduction in fertilizer use without thinking for a second what that's going to do to family bottom lines and margins across Western Canada. So from that perspective, I think we all believe that there is a way forward. It's one of the reasons that I'm involved with APP. I'm very excited about it. And that is one of the huge benefits of Alberta declaring independence is that we will get our own constitution and we can develop a system of government free from the corruption of the Westminster parliamentary model that we've been suffering under. And what APP is proposing and what our constitutional drafting committee is proposing is a system of direct democracy, where every single member of the Alberta legislature, every single elected member of the Alberta Senate will not be accountable to any political party. Political parties will be outlawed, and each individual senator, each individual member of the legislature will be only accountable to their individual constituents, with their constituents being able to recall them and force them to face the voters again in a by-election if 50,000 members of any constituency are unhappy with the way that their legislators or their senators are not following their wishes and instead following, the interests of corrupt special interests that are trying to subvert our government and our resources to ends that do not support the will of the people that elected them. So that's, one of the reasons that I'm so excited about this is that we can finally do away with, and again, one of the things that we're considering, and again, these are ideas that we're floating out there. I want to get people's reactions to them, but we're planning on holding a constitutional convention late in the fall where all of you will be invited to come and provide your input and what your ideas are with regard to what a constitution of an independent Alberta should look like, because we'd be wanting to have a referendum supporting the new constitution at the same time as we have a referendum with regard to Alberta's independence. And of course, in the context of that exercise, we would end up with true direct democracy. And one of the things that we're floating is the idea of, instead of having elected leaders like Jason Kenney or Justin Trudeau or Rachel Notley Trudeau, as I call her, what we were proposing is an elected executive council made up of 5 people or 6 or 7, whatever the number is, that would run the executive function of government, but without a president, without a governor, without a premier, prime minister, whatever, because it's time to do away with the cult of personality where we have one person who runs on their looks, their hair, their connections, whatever it is, and then thinks for 5 years that they get to govern over us as our dictator or king, where they decide what to do with our resources in the context of our government. So, that's one of the ideas that's being floated around, and I'd be interested in hearing people's input on that, because again, when you look at some of these leaders that we've had elected, like Jason Kenney completely ignoring the will of the people through COVID, like Justin Trudeau, who governs like a spoiled child without even realizing how stupid he looks when he does the things that he does. I think the time for despots and the time for tyrants ruling over us as if it's their divine right or the divine right of kings going back to the feudal ages should be over in a modern world. And that's something that I hope people will consider and think about and talk about on a going forward basis, as we move forward to wrest Alberta free from the tyranny that we've been living under and create an independent nation state for the benefit of all of us. So I think I probably talked long enough, and we're probably better off to go to questions right now and try to answer some questions. But again, I want to thank you for coming out tonight. I want to express from the bottom of my heart how proud I am to be able to be here tonight and be able to speak to all of you. And I would like to thank you for all of your time and attention. I'm very grateful. What's that?
We're going to do a quick break.
Sure.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Jeff Rath. So we're going to take about 10 minutes. Just everybody can grab another snack or a quick drink, and then we'll come back with the Q&A. How about now? Can I get everybody to come back to their chairs? We're going to get started with the Q&A. Please and thank you. And I've got some really good questions. Really good ones. And don't worry, I won't be giving the answers. I should keep one? Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'll keep one. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So just stand by there and you just let them have it.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm going to give this one to Lindsay. She's going to have it. As soon as every. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Read the right side of it. Okay. That side up.
I like it. I like it. It's a good question. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to take your seats. Recess is over. Get your drinks and get back to your chairs. Just hold on to that one. Okay, so I do understand that we do have a very special birthday in the house today. Chris Scott's girlfriend Jess's birthday is today, so if you will join our friend Lindsay, let's sing happy birthday for her, please.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Jess. Happy birthday to you. Now give us a wave. Woo! Happy birthday.
Thanks, Lindsay. Can I get our guests to come onto the stage, please, for the Q&A? If you're not liking the song, you did very well. Jeff, can you come up here for us, please? Oh, you want to be close or you want to be far? You guys got to share this one.
Oh, we got to share this one? Okay, we got to share this one.
Oh, that's the rule.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you bring me a cold water? Yeah. 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 I got a lot of questions.
Why not? We're going to put the little guy in the middle.
There we go.
Okay, so I do have a lot of really good questions here. What is the difference between the Alberta Prosperity Project and Freedom Alberta, Independence Party of Alberta, and Free Alberta Strategy? And do you think you can work together to unite some of these projects with basic ideas to become stronger and larger in numbers?
Well, I'll start off answering that. Fundamentally, the difference between APP and the others is that we have an extremely well thought out strategy that is completely legal, and it's the fastest pathway to independence. Now, for those of you who know anything about the Free Alberta strategy, drafted by Rob Anderson, a very bright lawyer, and Derek Fromm, a constitutional lawyer, and Barry Cooper, an ardent separatist who's an academic at the University of Calgary, they drafted this Free Alberta strategy, and there are some good things in it and some things that won't work very well. The things that are good about it is creating new legislation to protect depositors and investors from CRA and from the provincial government by creating new banking, security, and insurance regulations for Alberta-based businesses of those types. And in addition to that, the their plan is to not enforce federal dictates that they don't like. Now, the problem with that, in my opinion, is that number one, that would be illegal, and number two, they never thought through how the federal government would respond. But the way federal governments respond when a province isn't compliant with a federal dictate is they withhold federal transfer payments back to that province. So it's not really a winning strategy financially. And in addition to that, creating a constitutional crisis, which they intend on doing with the Free Alberta strategy, will ultimately be adjudicated by the Supreme Court. And these sorts of things, and Jeff knows as a constitutional lawyer, can take many years to resolve. And given the way the court is composed, well, you can be pretty sure that decisions are not going to be in favor of Alberta. They'll be in favor of the East and of Ottawa, particularly if we're creating an Alberta government is not following the law. So I think the Free Alberta strategy as proposed is flawed. But now let's hear from a constitutional lawyer.
The issue for me with the Free Alberta strategy is they have this idea that somehow or another we need to create a constitutional crisis in order to get Alberta to the point where it can then focus on independence. I've got news for them. We are in the midst of a constitutional crisis right now. We have a central government that is not governed by the rule of law. We have a spoiled child as a prime minister who thinks that when bouncy castles and flags that say mean things about him come to Parliament Hill, you know, he needs to invoke the Emergencies Act and start trampling citizens with horses. We have a prime minister that thinks that anytime he wants to score brownie points with his woke little friends in the Democratic Party in the United States, he can show them, you know, who's wearing the pants and just automatically declare handguns illegal or whatever the next foolishness is, you know, that he thinks that he needs to do as the dictator of Canada. So, you know, as far as I'm concerned, we're in the midst of a constitutional crisis, and we now need to do everything we can to extricate ourselves from this mess. And I think, you know, I have a lot of respect for Rob Anderson and the Free Alberta strategy. They have a lot of good ideas. I'm all for immediately passing legislation to have an Alberta police force. I'm all for immediately passing legislation to have an Alberta revenue agency that collects all taxes in Alberta, including federal income tax. I mean, does anybody here know that we send $60 billion a year to Ottawa in tax revenue, and we only get $27 billion of it back? I mean, how's that not a constitutional crisis? All that money we send to Ottawa, a good chunk of it goes to Quebec, about $10 billion a year. They can afford to have, get this, $5 a day universal daycare in the province of Quebec. So it's literally $100 a month is what people in Quebec pay for daycare. Well, working mums and dads in Alberta are paying over $1,800 and struggling to make ends meet, and they're doing it on our goddamn tax dollars. If that's not a constitutional crisis, I don't know what is. And, you know, you heard Dennis earlier referring to, you know, equalization and equalization requirements. They're not a requirement. The language in the Constitution, and it's section 36.2, I'll have anybody, you know, that wants to look at it, look it up. The language is the softest language you can imagine. Oh, we're committed to the principle of equalizing, you know, regional disparities so that every region can have equal access to social programs, blah, 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 right? It doesn't mean that hardworking Albertans need to send $10 billion a year to Quebec so that they can have surplus budgets. Well, everybody in this province is struggling to make ends meet because Trudeau's trying to destroy the goddamn oil industry. So that's what we need to focus on. We're in a constitutional crisis right now, and we all need to vote to get out of this mess. So I'll pass it over to Tanner now.
Why can't Trudeau be arrested for treason?
I honestly don't know.
Well, it seems like he should be, and maybe if there's a federal conservative Party. Like, I think Pierre might be interested in that if he becomes the leader of the Conservative Party and wins the election.
What is your plan to engage the First Nations people?
One of the things that APP's done that I'm particularly proud of is that APP is engaged in consultation with First Nations communities in Alberta. We have a former Vice Chief of the Assembly of First Nations and a former Chief of Mikisew Cree First Nation on the board of APP. And APP has adopted a very comprehensive Aboriginal sovereignty partnership proposal for First Nations in Alberta that in essence gives them everything that they've been litigating with the federal government over for the, or recognizes their legitimate concerns with regard to everything that they've been litigating with the federal government over for the last 100 years. So one of the reasons that we did that on a moving forward basis is both out of respect for Indigenous Albertans. The second reason that this policy was adopted and has the full support of the board of APP is that on a going forward basis, if you read the Clarity Act, one of the things that Trudeau is going to hold over our heads is, oh, well, you need Indigenous support in order to leave Alberta. The policy that's been adopted by APP, we're confident will garner over 90% support from First Nations people in this province. But beyond that, we'll be able to say to both Trudeau, or whoever is in power in Canada at the time, and the UN when we apply for membership, that a sovereign Alberta will do more for First Nations people in this province than the government of Canada has ever done. And we see that as a means to ensuring our independence on a going forward basis.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that by saying, if you want First Nations to be partners in the creation of a new Alberta, you can't create a situation that's worse for them than what they have now. So that's part of the essence of having First Nations on board as well. I really feel pretty good about that. The other thing I wanted to say was with respect to the United Nations. Now, many of us here are frustrated with the United Nations with a number of things. We don't buy into their climate policy. We don't buy into international pandemic treaties. We don't buy into that and a number of other things. And so as Jeff has pointed out, there are good and bad things with respect to the UN. Not every nation who is a member of the United Nations, and there are 195 countries in the world, and there are only 2 that are not members of the United Nations. One of them is Palestine, and the other is Vatican City. So the point that I'm getting at here is not every country abides by every dictate of the United Nations. And if you want to make change in the world, remember this. You keep your friends close, but you keep your enemies closer. So we'll be able to do more within than from without. So there's a little bit more nuance to this whole issue of Indigenous people in the United Nations and the importance of being members of something we can have influence in as opposed to zero influence.
How is the impending food shortage going to affect Albertans if we gain independence in the future and the food shortage is now?
That's an excellent question. You're quite correct from the data that I've observed and researched that there is a food shortage coming, and it's manufactured. It's not natural, right? This isn't something that's come as a consequence of natural disaster or other issues that have occurred throughout history. This is a planned shortage, right? Look at how many, for example, food processing plants in America have been destroyed since January of this year. It's in the high 90s. It's unbelievable, and that goes for beef. It goes for grains. It goes for chickens. I just read that some farm with 5 million chickens spontaneously burned up, destroyed. All of these stories are becoming more and more and more common, so something is going on. Now, in Dr. Michael Wagner's book, I don't know if we have it here or not, his newest book, he talks about Alberta's economic power. And in it, he says, if Alberta tried to gain independence back in the 1910s or 1920s, etc., it would have been impossible because we didn't at that time possess the necessary amount of economic power required to do it. Today, however, it's a different story. We do have the necessary capacity required, if required, and I don't believe that it would be, but if required, we have the necessary capacity to be self-sufficient, right? If we had to totally lock in, we could do it. That's not saying that's desirable. I'm not saying you'd want that, but I'm saying if you had to do it, you could. Now, with regards to food and so on, like the very first thing you would do in an independent Alberta with regards to farming, right, is eliminate that policy, which is called, I believe it's something green policies for a healthy economic future or something from the federal government, right? You would immediately eliminate that quota to reduce nitrogen fertilizer emissions by 30% by 2030, because according to the government, the only way you can do so is by stopping using fertilizer, right? It's not like that, it's a funny policy, because you'd think, if you're rational, which you are, but it seems like, there's some in government who aren't, that if you adopted new techniques to reduce the emissions of fertilizer, then you should recognize that as exactly that, which is a reduction in emissions. But with that policy that government is proposing, it doesn't work like that. With that policy, 1 ton of fertilizer, no matter how you use it, no matter what techniques you use when you implement it into the soil, will produce a certain amount of emissions, no matter what, and you can't change it. You can, but according to government, you can't. And so the only way to reduce the emissions is to reduce the amount of fertilizer. And then, of course, you'd eliminate the carbon tax, right? Nitrogen fertilizer is created using hydrocarbons, right? Natural gas. And so what do we suppose will happen to the price of fertilizer, as we saw even just a few months ago when you impose carbon taxes on one of the major inputs in fertilizer itself? Well, of course, it's going to rise, right? Of course. Not only so, but if you had a proper constitution that in essence locked government out of the business of farming, as if it should ever be in there to begin with, right? You would create a much more stable and predictable future, right? What's happening right now? Look at all these farmers and all these investors who don't know what's going to happen 5 or 10 years down the line. Who knows if I'm going to get DEF tomorrow, right? There's a DEF shortage coming. Who knows if I'm going to get the additives that I need for diesel and so on? I don't know. You don't know. There's all of these stories that are coming out of government restricting these things. And so if you can get government out, you can increase the amount of predictability in the market so that the markets themselves don't fluctuate to such a wild capacity and instead even out and level out, thereby producing a much more efficient outcome. And I'd lastly just refer you to the story of Joseph. It might be time to start storing. And if I was advising a government, I would say, start storing. But that's just my own advice.
So I just want to add something to what Tanner just said. So when you think of restricting the price, or restricting oil, that causes gas prices to go up. And their idea is to compel a change from internal combustion vehicles to electric vehicles, right? That's part of the green rationale. By the same token, by restricting conventional foods, including beef, chicken, etc., what does that compel? That compels what's happened in London, Ontario, the creation of the world's largest cricket factory for the production of cricket-based foods. And even here in Alberta, we have a mealworm factory that's created food for pets. But interestingly enough, at the Calgary Stampede, you could buy mealworm hot dogs. So this is coming, folks, and this is how they compel you to change the way you eat and everything else. It's absolutely insane. I don't know about you, but there's no damn way, knowingly, will I ever eat mealworms or crickets.
There's a question here. It says, how many members do you have? It's from somebody that posed the question online. And this morning, the COO did send out an email that we were just under 7,500. So that's how many we've got. And remember, we've only been at this since February the 21st was our first event, 2022.
And what we're working on, and I would really encourage everybody to get involved in through chapter development and chapter growth. I think we're now over 130 chapters, Dennis, in the province. 137 chapters in the province. And what we're hoping is that by this fall, and that is our goal, that we will have more members in APP than they have members in the United Corruption Party of Alberta.
And remember, we right now have over 1/3 followers as well, which we're working to convert to 2 members as well. So we're well on the way of getting to our objectives.
So this ties in then with the next question. Is there a Youth Alberta Prosperity Project? Well, there is actually a chapter for the Alberta Prosperity Project Youth Division. Tanner is a co-leader of that. And we also have a seniors chapter leader. It's David Steckenrider. Go ahead, Tanner.
I'll just say what Shannon said. Yes, we do have one. We held our first event a couple of weeks ago now in Red Deer. It was a lot of fun. Actually, another individual down in Okotoks is just about to start up his own Alberta Prosperity Project youth chapter. And so it's exciting. You know, it's my age group is more of a stubborn lot, and we tend to be apathetic about such things. But the current situation, whether my age group likes it or not, has demanded that they become involved, because it might be that they go to university and learn all of these ideologies and all of these dogmas that are theoretical and they sound so wonderful. But when it comes to practicing them, the fact of the matter is no one my age can afford a house. No one my age can afford to fill up on fuel. No one my age can find a job that covers their living expenses because of the hydra of inflation that consumes everything in its path. And so those my age might hold certain views and they might hold certain ideologies, but now reality is coming back and it's slapping them in the face, and it's slapping them very, very hard. And so they have to do something. They have to change because, well, what are they going to do? They can't live. Now, as Jeff mentioned, of course, government has ideas of its own to keep us in this state of an apathetic slumber, I would call it, right? A universal basic income, or the idea that you never have to work if you only vote for us. Or, you know, we can have all of these benefits if only you vote for us. But again, the reality is coming back, and it's coming fast. So we're very excited. We're going to keep working our hardest to grow that chapter. And if you know anyone, you know, under the age of, well, Dennis says that, you know, youth is a mindset, and he's probably quite right, I think. But anyways, but if you know someone younger, send them over, have them send us an email. We'd be happy.
My wife says I'm incredibly immature all the time.
I like that one. But anyways, have them send them over, and we'd love to get connected with them. So.
Okay. So there was a second part to that question. It says, at what age can anybody join? And there really is not limited age. So we do have a youth membership. So 21 years and under is a 3-year membership for $20. So you can be any age.
And I know all of you are young at heart anyhow, so you're all youth. But you have to fit into a certain category to get involved in the youth group.
Dr. Modry, we all know the UN is an evil, power-hungry organization. Can we count on the UN to guarantee Alberta access to the sea?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. We don't need to rely on the UN, but as we move forward, and when we become, and we will, a member of the United Nations, why would they not support their own Article 124, 125 in the Convention of the Law of the Sea? Now, there's not a whole lot of teeth to that, but we have teeth as an independent nation, because right now we have no leverage to get many of our products, particularly our hydrocarbons, to Tidewater. So as Tanner has pointed out many times, and I pointed out many times, that the majority of our trade, 90% of it, goes south. But if we're dealing with an intransigent Canada and British Columbia, we've got a couple of options. Number one is that we could impose massive tariffs on any goods and services passing east and west across our borders. That's one. Or two, we could block commerce across our borders altogether, including flyovers. Now, the other thing is that as the country is divisible, provinces are divisible as well. And northern BC desperately wants an energy corridor, because First Nations, all First Nations in northern BC want an energy corridor. So they are aligned with us and may actually wind up being the first domino to fall when Alberta becomes an independent nation. If not northern BC, then Saskatchewan. Jeff, do you want to comment on that, or Tanner?
Well, I think Dennis has covered it. I mean, everybody talks about, oh, Alberta's landlocked. Well, that cuts both ways. There's only highways coming into Alberta from British Columbia. There's only 5 of them. It's pretty easy to stop traffic at the border and impose tariffs on every truckload of Japanese cars and every bit of BC produce and everything else trying to move through Alberta to Ontario. So, it's in, British Columbia's benefit to provide access to the sea to Alberta in the same way it would be, in the system of free trade for Alberta to provide access to British Columbia's products to the rest of Canada. But these issues go both ways, and I don't think it's something that really needs to be of great concern to us in moving towards independence. I think there's lots of people out there that are that are going to be desperately defending the status quo. Groups like Wellington Advocacy, all the special interest groups that have all of our politicians in their back pockets and who are very good at at getting governments to give our money to them. I mean, all of those people are going to be fighting tooth and nail to maintain the status quo. But we can't let them frighten us out of what is the most logical course for us, which is to once and for all declare ourselves an independent country.
So the essence of the term landlocked, we're really more policy locked than landlocked. I think that's an important consideration. And getting out from under federal control gets rid of us being policy locked along the lines that we've just talked about. Tanner, do you have anything more you want to add to that? If so. Oh yeah, do you want to talk about Mexico and oil right now as well?
So we ship a lot of oil to America, and Alberta has massive reserves, right? We compose 98% of Canada's oil reserves, which are 3rd largest in the world. So every day we ship 3.8 million barrels. It fluctuates a little bit, but on average, we ship 3.8 million barrels of oil to America every day. And that oil is taken predominantly to the Midwest, to the Chicago areas, where it's refined to then be used for America's enterprise. And to be totally honest, we want to get our oil actually to the Gulf Coast. We don't have enough capacity going there. We want it to get there because the Gulf Coast is the largest market in the world for our specific brand of oil, which is like a heavy sour blend. So we want to get there. We presently don't, because we have, in my opinion, we have negotiators in the federal government who do not, as Jeff has so precisely mentioned and said, who do not wish to see our oil industry flourish. But nonetheless, about Mexico. So Canada is the largest exporter of oil to America. Just behind us, actually not just behind us, but behind us is Mexico. They're the 3rd largest. And they ship 800,000 barrels of oil to America every day so that America can refine it and use it. Because Mexican oil is similar to Alberta. It's not quite as heavy from what I understand, but it's similar. However, the president in Mexico, just a few months ago, announced that Mexico is just about to shut in all of their oil production. They want to be totally self-sufficient. What that means is not one single drop of Mexican oil is going to be going to America any longer. And so there's going to be a vast discrepancy, like 800,000 barrels per day that the Americans are going to have to make up. But then you look at Keystone XL and you realize that that pipeline, though it had its flaws and some things needed to be worked out, was going to ship another 800,000 barrels of oil to America every day. So when you become independent, you see, you'd have proper negotiators at the table. It's true that America canceled Keystone, but does anyone here think that we had proper negotiators with the president? Of course not. It was the federal government that was negotiating, which really means it probably wasn't a negotiation at all. Instead, it was a handshake and a high five. So when you become independent, it just goes to show, we would have so much more leverage than we currently do. We would have so much, we would have such a higher capacity to negotiate properly compared to what we do now. And so I believe that the future for Alberta with regards to trade is exceedingly bright.
And just to add to that, talking, oh, sorry. Yeah. Thank you very much. Just to add to that on the standpoint of energy economics, one of the things that Albertans should embrace as well is we don't need pipelines to transport oil. There's enough oil pipelines that are currently moving to the through the United States that if we were to fill those pipelines up with gas and diesel instead of oil, we'd likely be far better off. The unions in Alberta have been yelling for years about the need to increase refinery capacity in Alberta, and instead of shipping raw crude out to terminals in the Midwest at a $20 per barrel arbitrage cost, we could literally, make it a law that in Alberta, any oil company that wants to produce Alberta oil should refine it in the province and only ship gasoline and diesel fuel out. And we could renegotiate deals with the refineries in the United States that no longer be refining our product. They could become our sales terminals for gasoline and diesel fuel. And if they didn't want to become our sales agents for gasoline and diesel fuel at a lower negotiated cost, we'd simply build sales terminals upstream of the pipelines and sell our own damn gas and diesel into the United States. I've spoken to pipeline engineers on it. As a lot of you may know, when we ship heavy crude west to the coast to be refined at refineries in China with cheap Chinese labor instead of refining it in Alberta, we actually ship condensate back that they store in Vancouver to clean the pipelines and thin the product. So if you can ship condensate in a pipeline, you can surely ship gasoline and diesel, and I've been assured that that's the case by various engineers I've spoken to. And I think that that's what we need to consider going forward. Business as usual and the status quo needs to stop, and we need to focus on making Alberta the most prosperous nation in the world. And as it is, and I want people to consider this tonight when you go to bed, and just think about this idea that if Alberta were to declare independence tomorrow, we would have the highest GDP per capita of any country in the world right now. And think about what we could make it if we work together. Thanks.
And I want to link oil to the youth as well, because there are some youth here as well. So if you want to engage the youth, here's one idea. Ask them to give you their cell phone or their laptop, and then just keep it. And eventually they're going to want it back. And in order to get it back, you've got to ask them, well, how many products emanate from a barrel of oil? And if they don't know the answer, then they can't get it back. And then you got to ask them, if they know the answer, you got to ask them this question. Is it possible for you to have your cell phone or your computer without the hydrocarbon industry? And if they answer yes, don't give it back. And if they answer no, then they understand that if we end the hydrocarbon industry, we will literally be going back to the Stone Age, because there's over 6,000 products that emanate from a barrel of oil. There's how you can engage the youth.
Would Alberta remain a member of the UN forever?
I think Dennis has already answered that question. I think there's a lot more advantages to being a member of the United Nations to not being a member of the United Nations. And again, keep in mind, just because we would become a member of the United Nations would not mean that we would have to sign on to every nonsense convention that emanates from the General Assembly. I think it's important to be part of an international organization. Recognition as an independent nation state flows directly from membership in the United Nations. And I think, by far, the benefits outweigh, the pros outweigh the cons, I guess, in the context of UN membership, from the context of trade and another number of other facets. So, I don't, as much as the UN has lately been doing a lot of, clearly stupid things under the influence of the globalists and the WEF, right now, on balance, the benefits outweigh the detriments. And, it's part and parcel of, if we want to join the club, we have to follow some of its rules, I think is the best way to put it. See, no applause to that at all, right?
But it's like I said earlier, you keep your friends close and your enemies closer. And I think that's a very important concept with respect to having influence at the level of the UN. Now, as Jeff said, if we're the #1 GDP per capita nation in the world, the best place in the world to live, work, start a business, raise a family, then we will have attention and clout. And you can be sure that much of the US will be in support. And you know the states such as Montana and Texas and Florida and others that would be totally aligned with what we're doing.
And something else to add, I think, in the context of Alberta independence, is that one of the things that Alberta is going to have to have, because what we're talking about doing is constitutionalizing a requirement, one, for balanced budgets, and two, for a flat 10% income tax, both personally and for corporations. So, we would end up being one of the lowest tax regimes in the world. And, one of the things Alberta would need is to have a very robust immigration system, because that would be one of our biggest problems, is all of the people that would want to immigrate to Alberta to take advantage of that tax system. So unlike Quebec, when every time Quebec would talk about separating from Canada, there'd be a net outflow of population. The biggest challenge that independent Alberta is going to face will be a net inflow of population, people wanting to take advantage of the prosperity that we will be able to create, being one of the wealthiest, lowest tax jurisdictions in the world. So that's something else that I'd like everybody to consider as well.
Yeah, and one of the things that you'll hear from the Federalists is they're going to say, well, there's going to be a massive efflux of business as well, not just people, but business. Well, there might be some businesses that leave, but let's face it, where does business want to go? It wants to go to the lowest taxed region with the most favorable regulatory environment. And that's what Alberta would create, the best regulatory environment with the lowest taxation. There will be, for every one company that might leave Alberta, there's going to be 100 or 500 that are going to want to come.
If you cannot influence the provincial government to get independence by the strength of a large membership, what is your next step?
They won't get elected without our support. It's really that simple. They have to agree with what it is we are proposing for them. This is really the crux of growing the membership to 500,000, 1 million, or 1.5 million people. It's always been in your control. There just was never an organization available to make this happen. That's why we're doing something that's never happened before, and that's why it will work.
And I want everybody to consider what all of us together accomplished in voting Jason Kenney out of office, right? Had they not cheated and brought in the mail-in ballot system, it was clear from all the internal polling that we were doing that Jason Kenney was going to be voted out of office in Red Deer on April 9th with less than 25% support of the existing members at that time. So people working together, which is what we're trying to do, can directly impact politics in this province and can directly change the direction that this province is headed in. And I'm really proud of everybody that has been working together to bring that about, because we have a lot more power than people think. And the proof of that is all of the politicians running to get in front of the parade. There's Danielle Smith. Oh, I believe in prosperity. There's Brian Jean, for God's sake. I believe in autonomy. Oh, I believe in sovereignty. I mean, everybody's running to try to get in front of the APP, in front of the APP banner, using all of our language, using, even the word prosperity and all of their materials. We've got their attention. And the more that we can grow this, the more that governments in Alberta are going to have to be responsive to us as a movement.
And here's something else. If you want to see the effectiveness of a movement, just recently think about the trucker movement and how that galvanized the forces around the world, not just in Canada. So this is what I mean by a movement. This is what we can create and do. It's amazing. We just need to do it.
And also, getting back to the fertilizer issue and Trudeau and Gibault trying to directly destroy farms in Western Canada. If they had thought that they had trouble finding tow trucks to move semi-trailers, wait until they try to move 100,000 combines off of the Trans-Canada. Right?
And that will happen.
What will happen if the new premier calls an early election?
I don't think the new premier will call an early election. The new premier is going to have to convince the voters that that person is the right person in front of the right party to win the election. So I'm pretty confident that that there isn't enough time really to call an early election. I really, do you think they'd call an early election?
No, I mean, after what happened with Jim Prentice calling an early election, I can't see anybody doing it again, so I don't think it's on the table, to be honest.
Why don't you guys come speak at the schools?
Because we don't have rainbow flags.
But that does not mean we don't have an opinion. And to be perfectly clear, you know, we're a live, let live kind of group. But you know, I got to tell you a story, a very brief one. So when Peter Pocklington owned the Oilers, he would bring in a prominent individual once a year to speak to junior achievement, because he sponsored junior achievement. So I had the privilege for $10,000 per person, including my wife. So it cost me $20,000 to have dinner with Jerry Ford one year, George Bush Sr. another year, and Maggie Thatcher. Now Maggie Thatcher, I love that lady, the Iron Lady. We were talking about compromise, and she made this point. She said, compromise, I hate compromise. Compromise implies that both parties are wrong, and on values and principles, you never compromise. Now, I, in the medical profession, understand XY, that's a male. I understand XX, that's a female. But what's XYY? What's XXY? There are ambiguities that exist, and we have to accept the fact that there are ambiguities out there. And we have to accept the fact that there are certain people that, for whatever reason, when they're old enough, 18 and over, can make a decision. But right now, we've got, I don't know, what are there, 30 different genders? I mean, it's ridiculous to think about this. It's absolutely insane. And this is the kind of stuff that's occurring in the school system. How do you fix that? Very easy. You give parents a voucher for every one of their children, and you can take that voucher and go to any school that you want, whether it's in the public system, the charter school system, the private system, and this is how you will get rid of the nonsense that's occurring with this ridiculous policies that are occurring now.
What's going to happen with national parks in Alberta?
Oh, that's an easy one. Yeah. Together, we will own them. There will be Alberta national parks. Yeah. Same thing with the military bases.
And something else I just wanted to touch on, Dennis had alluded to it earlier. I mean, when you read the petition that we've drafted with regard to Alberta independence, or seeking a referendum for Alberta independence, the petition specifically states that we're seeking Alberta independence debt-free from Canada. Now, Shannon had mentioned earlier that I've done a lot of work over the years on behalf of First Nations people, and in doing that type of work and valuing Aboriginal claims, where, you know, the government, through its gross incompetence, corruption, et cetera, you know, cheated various First Nations out of, you know, let's say, you know, $10 million, $20 million back in the 70s. You bring that forward with compound interest, and we've done the actuarial work in cases like this. By the time you run those numbers through the high interest rates of the 1980s, right, where we had 18, 19, and 20% interest rates, you'll quickly find that a $10 million that's owing in 1970, you know, turns into $150 million in, you know, 2020, let's say, right? So this $700 billion that Alberta has already paid to Ottawa, right? If you were to apply those same actuarial tables to it and bring it forward, on Bank of Canada interest rates through the 80s into present day, Alberta is owed probably well over $8 trillion by Canada. So any thought that we're leaving Canada, owing Canada a goddamn nickel is misplaced.
I like that, 8 trillion. Wow. There's our negotiating position, our opening negotiating position.
What actions will be implemented regarding natural resources, oil, water, forests, and etc.? What action?
I'm not sure how to answer this. What actions will be implemented? I guess the most important action is we would be out from under egregious bills that inhibit the development and transport of our natural resources, like Bill C-69, Bill C-48. They'd be gonzo. The carbon tax would be gone. Once that happens, there's going to be a very significant rekindling of the interest of investing in Alberta's energy system.
Do you think for a moment Justin Castro will not declare the War Measures Act against Alberta once you declare independence? Once we declare independence.
Well, I think that's unlikely. If you consider the two secession referendums in Quebec, there was no military threat at all at that time, to my knowledge. Second is everything we're doing is perfectly legal and within the understanding and acceptance of international norms. And third, in my opinion, there's going to be a Republican government in the US that will be favorably disposed to us as well. I don't think there'll be a War Measures Act. And finally, when we have our own police force and able to enforce our own borders, for example, I really don't think that will happen as well. And one other thing is that negotiations with the military based in Alberta will go a long ways in preventing that sort of thing from occurring. Now, I can't say that Trudeau isn't going to do something crazy, but I think it's extremely unlikely. And anyhow, but for what we are doing, what else is there? What else is there out there that can save us? So we're a province of people with a can-do attitude, a work ethic, an entrepreneurial spirit, and that's what the APP is all about, an entrepreneurial spirit. We're going to strike out on our own and be a whole lot better off as an independent nation than within Canada. Anything else, guys, that you can think of to add to that?
Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a nice round of applause for Dennis Modry, Jeff Rath, Tanner Naday. So I do have a surprise guest. You might have heard of him before, and he's in our audience. So I just said to him, would you want to come up here? And he said, sure. So our next guest, a courageous defender of rights and freedoms, a folk hero, if you will. I quoted him when I opened this event. I've heard him speak on many occasions, and I can honestly tell you that the energy he brings when he gets on the stage and a hold of this microphone will spark a passion in all of you to be part of something that is history in the making. He's put on a lot of miles in the last little while, not just in Alberta, all the way to Ottawa and back. He is a household name. His popularity grows. He once said, and I said this at the beginning, sometimes to do the right thing, one has to stand up and be alone. But when you do the right thing, you're only alone for a moment. He advocates for truth. He advocates for kindness. He advocates for understanding for those who have different perspective. And I can tell you, you all know, his barbecue is spot on. Ladies and gentlemen, from the Whistle Stop Cafe in Mirror, Alberta, Mr. Chris Scott.
Thank you very much. So I wasn't planning on speaking tonight. I didn't think I was going to be. I figured it's going to be a nice, relaxing night, early night. Come, drop some stuff off, say hello, head back and get some echo, and get some much needed sleep. I was up fairly late last night getting some stuff prepared for today and also for the weekend. We're doing the Bashaw Medieval Fair, so that's going to be a lot of fun. But I guess there is a silver lining in being asked to speak tonight. And before I say what that silver lining is, I have to ask, who made those cinnamon buns? Would you please stand up? Come on and take a bow. I'm telling you, those cinnamon buns are the silver lining to staying longer tonight, because I was able to eat maybe one more, and I think I'll hit them up again before I leave. So thank you very much. And thank you for coming. It's really nice to see so many people out and doing the whole community thing. The backyard barbecue idea that we've been missing the last 3 years, it's back, and boy, is it ever back. I mean, this stuff is happening all over the province. Everyone's doing it in their own way, and it's great. And it's very encouraging, because when people get together and we visit and share stories and feelings, yes, feelings, men, a few things happen, and not the least of them is we start to realize that other people feel just the same way as we do. Maybe not about everything, but for sure a lot of things. And why do we generally feel like other people do? Well, it's because we're all human beings. And we all want mostly the same things out of life. I say mostly. We want to survive in our own way and leave some sort of a legacy on this earth, whether it's children or something we've done or even just lives we've touched. That's kind of what it means to be a human being, interacting with other human beings. Which makes the last 3 years so much stranger. How strange was it to go for that long being told it was a crime to interact with other human beings? How did you feel when we were going through that? Was anybody here happy with that? I'm surprised there's not one, because there's some people that just don't like to interact. There you go, I knew it. But that was weird, wasn't it? And when we lose that ability to interact and connect with fellow human beings, we're kind of missing out on a major part of our life. And it leaves us feeling a little bit empty sometimes, maybe a little bit depressed. Look at the statistics for the last 3 years, and it's absolutely horrifying how people were feeling and how many people lost all hope and gave up. That's the legacy of those that forced these crazy, irresponsible, unjustified rules and restrictions on us. That's their legacy. They have their legacy is that they harmed the people of Alberta for no reason. I see this, and you see this, and millions of other Albertans see this, but there are some that don't still. There are some, like Justice Adam Germain, who basically told me that I was responsible for the harm done to Alberta from a virus, from nature. It was my fault, because I existed and lived as a human being was supposed to. And I had to make reparations for that. As a matter of fact, I had to pay AHS $30,000 for the privilege of being a human being and acting like a human being. It's very weird. So there is a silver lining to all this. Judging from some of the questions I heard tonight, people are starting to become very aware that our problem doesn't lie necessarily at our municipal level of government, or even at the provincial level, or really even at the federal level. Our issues are coming down the pipeline, so to speak, from global organizations and global institutions with global ideas. But these ideas are not from people like you and I. We have no voice there. We have no influence there. As a matter of fact, they don't care about us. Even further than that, they despise us because we're human beings, because we want to live as humans. They despise that. To them, and this is word for word, we are useless eaters. One of the most anti-human sentiments that I've heard in a long time. But we live in a very anti-human age, don't we? Where the sanctity of life isn't celebrated, it's despised and condemned. And we're told that we have to make sacrifices in everything from our way of life to the children that we have, to, did I say the quality of life? Every aspect of our life we have to make sacrifices to appease these anti-human gods, these self-proclaimed gods that consider us to be nothing more or more important or significant than the mealworms they want us to eat. So I would say these are very serious problems, would you? That people think our entire existence isn't necessary or worth it. As a matter of fact, our existence has to be exterminated in order to what? Because climate change. You're a virus on the planet. Everything that happens on this earth is your fault. As a matter of fact, we need to reduce the world's population to 1.5 billion people to achieve this goal of sustainable development. That's what this is about. It's the United Nations Plan for Sustainable Development, which includes Agenda 2030. And going past that, I can't imagine it gets better. I'm probably right in assuming that it gets even worse. So, that's a pretty big hurdle, would you say? A global organization that doesn't believe we should exist. That's a toughie. So what do we do about it? Does anybody have any answers? We always hear about what the problems are and what's coming at us and where we're headed if we don't do something, but what do we do? I like it. Well, that is certainly one thing we can do, get an APP membership. And you might be asking yourself, well, what is that going to do? And the answer is, while you may think that your membership or your voice is just one and it's not powerful enough, let's think about what it sounds like when people sing, for instance. When one person sings, it can be fairly impressive, right? When two people sing, it's nicer. When you get a choir of 100 or 200 or 3 people singing together, it actually, it changes the way you feel. It alters your perception of reality. It's so powerful. So that one membership, your one voice, becomes a note in a choir of thousands, of millions, singing the same tune. And no, it's not Johnny Cash. You're singing the song of freedom, of humanity. This is how we want to live. We are Albertans, and we want to live as human beings with family in our core values, and friendship, and our faith and our religion, and our acceptance of others with different views. That's what our song is about. So yeah, that membership is very important. It's critically important. What else can we do? Unite. I hear that all the time, and that is true. When human beings unite around a truth, around a common goal, we can literally move mountains. We have moved mountains in the past. Heck, we've blown them off the face of the earth in the past. So yes, unity is very important, but it has to be centered in truth. I've had a lot of different groups tell me that, well, you need to get your group to unify with this group so we can do things. Well, yeah, I'm open to stuff like that. as long as what we're unifying around is a truth. There's a lot of people out there that are telling you, you have to do this or you have to do that. A good one is, you have to vote for me so we can defeat the NDP. Well, that's not unifying around a truth. I'm not going to unify around a politician or a leadership hopeful who wants me to unite around the idea of defeating another person. I've discovered over the past few months that I don't particularly care about defeating the NDP. And you might be saying, wow, what are you talking about, you crazy NDP shill? Not by a long shot. What I mean is, I don't believe that my actions should be to defeat Rachel Notley. There are so many more important things to do than defeat Rachel Notley. And does every idea she have bad? No, it's not. She's had some good ideas. Overall, I mean, I wouldn't vote for her if she was the last 6 names on an otherwise empty ballot. But my goal is not to defeat her. My goal is to use my resources and my time and my voice to do something that actually makes a difference. And I'm not talking about electing a new government difference, because is that really any different? How different was it over the last 3 years? Not very. That's not change. Real change happens when we do something that's never been done before. When we finally stand up for ourselves and those around us, and we use our time, our energy, and our resources to accomplish something truly great. Does anybody know what that is? It's something we've never done before. Well, yes, the independence, we haven't done that before. We've never stood up for ourselves. We've compromised on election day. We've listened to political candidates tell us why the other candidate is so bad. They're so bad and they did this. I just read an email from one of the parties talking about how an MLA hacked into the AHS database just to prove that he could do it because there's a problem there. And we have to vote for them because this guy did that. Well, you know what? I don't think it's actually legal to do what he did, but in a way, I'm glad he did. Because he showed that the system that we had our private information in was not very secure. And I think that this political group that's trying to tell us that we need to condemn him for doing that is more embarrassed about the fact that they were in power when this happened, that they dropped the ball and allowed our information to be easily hacked by somebody with very little experience at home. That's the real story there. So no, I'm sorry, Mr. Whatever your name is, I will not vote for you because that guy hacked into a database. Tell me what you're going to do differently that's never been done before in the last 116 years that is going to guarantee my rights, my freedoms, my self-determination going forward as an Albertan. What will you do? And it certainly isn't condemning another person because they did something you don't like. I feel like the more I get into this, the more questions come up. Well, if we don't vote for people because we don't want to vote for these guys, then what do we do? Think back to the last federal election, or actually the last 2 or 3, because I think Justin calls an election like every year or so or something nowadays. Do you remember the campaign? It was always a slam against the other candidate. They never really told us what they wanted to do. Unless it was legalize marijuana, legalize cannabis and cannabis products, which, by the way, good thing. However, it wasn't to our benefit. It was to get people off the couch who don't vote. They didn't tell us that they were going to do anything better for our benefit. The UCP didn't do that last election. All that election was about defeating the NDP. Now, what did we gain? The current government had issues in the last few years because of this pandemic. The energy industry was annihilated. All of our industries were annihilated. The province was in economic ruin. It had nothing to do with the governing party, in so much as that they just did what everybody else would do. They didn't do anything different that hadn't been done in the last 116 years. All the same. So it's time that we stood up for ourselves and our friends and neighbors. It's time that we started to use our noggins and see right through the lies that are being told to us. It's time for us to start asking tough questions of these people that want to be our leaders and our representatives and our voices. And I'm telling you, that question, what are you going to do differently that hasn't been done in the last 116 years? That's probably one of the most effective questions you can ask, because they're all saying the same thing right now. Not one of them crosses the finish line in my mind. So if we're going to do this, if we're going to make this happen, things like that membership that we mentioned are so important. This isn't bragging rights or boasting rights. Oh, hey, we got the biggest group around. I have my own organization, WS Full Steam Ahead. It's a membership-based organization, and we took off like a rocket. I could have built that membership probably 3, 4, 5 times the membership right now and said, I've got the biggest membership out there. But I didn't, because I want solutions. Now, while I believe in the goals of my own organization, I spend most of my time advocating for what the APP is proposing, because I want to do something, and I want to encourage other people to do something for other people that's going to be a real change. WS Full Steam Ahead wants to advocate for people that are affected by the vaccine mandates and get them remedy. That's important. The Alberta Prosperity Project wants to change the face of this province, wants to change our destiny, chart a new path forward so that this never happens again. Because I'm sure you've heard by now, when individual rights and freedoms are held in the highest regard, the rights and freedoms of society, they take care of themselves, not like the budget balances themselves, but it's important to have our rights and freedoms. And that's why it's so important. If you actually want a solution, you got to really start using your noggin. And when people come to you and they say, you got to get behind this idea, we're going to do this, ask yourself, is this actually a solution? Or is this just a kind of a sidebar distraction? And focus, be hyper-focused on the solution. And right now, the solution is building this membership, building this parade so big that we tip the scales and we force those who want to be our representatives to acknowledge the fact that we have had enough and we are standing up and we are not going to accept the same old thing ever again. This is not a left or right election. This is a freedom or not freedom election. This is not a socialist or capitalist election. This is a human or anti-human election. This is probably the most important 9 months till May, 10 months. The most important 10 months in our lives. So I would encourage everybody out there to focus on solutions. And I will tell you that there is a solution. We can do this, and we will do this as long as every person who is on board with this gets their membership and tells 2 people and encourages them to tell 2 more people. We are going to see some exponential growth in this movement. And when we do, those who are watching us, they're going to have no choice but to get in front of our parade. And our parade is about freedom, nothing else. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chris Scott. So remember at the beginning, I said, Chris Scott always says, sometimes to do the right thing, one has to stand up and be alone. But when you do the right thing, you're only alone for a moment. Alone, you can only do so little, but together we can do so much more. So we are asking all of you to join us in doing more, creating more, and having more. The gentlemen who gave our presentations to you this evening, they showed you the how. They gave you the how-to, and together we must do it. We have been misled, betrayed by those who we trusted to be our voices in making sure Alberta would achieve her greatness and give Albertans the opportunity for more. and they've all been silent. Gone is our trust in all levels of government. They've demonstrated that not a single one of them has the courage to speak out, to speak the truth, or to be the voice of the very people who put them in the positions that they have. They have shown that their only concerns were for themselves, for their positions, and for their own pocketbooks. The time for change has arrived, and we must seize it. We must overcome all of this and rebuild vibrant, strong, healthy communities. As I said earlier, we have been sweeping across this province, and in a few short months, we have close to 7,500 members, but we need more. Thousands of people have heard our message, and we intend to share it with thousands more. We need all of you. All of you need to leave this event and be excited about taking your freedom and your prosperity into your own hands. As Dennis said earlier, if not us, then who? If not now, then when? We have one chance to secure a future for our children and our grandchildren. We have one chance to gain our freedom and our independence, and that is by electing an independent-focused government in 2023. We need people with vision. We need people with ideas. We need people with energy. Our legacies depend on that. Our children and our grandchildren need us to pick up the torch that the Alberta Prosperity Project has lit and crest the hill of independence with it. We have good people at our table. You've heard from some of them today, but we need more. Buy your membership. They start at $20. Buy a t-shirt, buy a hat. That's how we keep this bus rolling across the province. Become a chapter leader. There's currently 137 chapters, but we need more. Become a volunteer. There's so many things that you can do to help further this project along. Create events in your communities, just like this one. Have a barbecue, have a picnic. Simply go shopping wearing that Alberta Prosperity ball cap. Start a conversation. Just start it. Check out our websites for the dates and locations of the summer events. There's 2 next Thursday. One's in Calgary, one's in Lloydminster. There is great power in communities that have discovered what they care about. We need you to take this message into your communities and turn that "you're never going to do this" into "together, this is going to work." We need all of you to be the change that you want to see in this world. We're building a community within ourselves, and we need all of you to join us. We need you to join us. This message is strong, and our community is growing. And our goal, as Dennis said, as Jeff said, with no politicians at our table, is to unite 500,000 to 1 million to 1.5 million people. And that is something that has never been done before. We're creating history right now. And I challenge you, I encourage you to get on the right side of that history. We must be more courageous than we have ever been. Greater in spirit, larger in outlook. And we must restore our communities owing our allegiance never again to a government, but to our fellow man. Alberta will become a sovereign constitutional republic, one where the First Nations sit at the table in the creation of a new nation of Alberta, one where no one is ever left behind. And on that great day, Alberta truly will become united, strong, and free. Thank you for joining us today. Lindsay's just going to set up her sound equipment here, and you can enjoy some music from Lindsay Butler and enjoy an adult beverage and mix with the people that are around here. Share the message, build your community. You want this?